All right, that's a little better. My name is Stephen Jacobs. I'm the deputy editor here at Street Fight. And I just want to first thank you all for coming to Denver for this event. It's something that's new for us, second year, but it's something we're really, really excited about. And I know, some of you flying from the East Coast probably wasn't too easy, but we really appreciate it. This panel is at the beginning. It's our first panel because I think it's one of the kind of most applicable markets for data and for particularly in-store data. And so today we're going to be running through a number of issues from evolution of consumer journey to privacy to the cool things you can do with data and some of the kind of bad parts about that creativity. So I wanted to quickly introduce our panelists, starting with Ben from TPN Retail.
Hi. Hi, Ben Gauthier from TPN Retail. There's a typo that's up there, which is fine. TPN, we're a retail marketing company. The parts that I work on are a lot of the digital initiatives. That's going to be online, in-store, digital screens, and connectivity for mobile and web.
Cool. My name is Sohrab. I'm from InMarket out in Los Angeles. Our company, our focus is on proximity marketing and creating a network for apps, app publishers, retailers, brands to all kind of come together around beacons to create the best experience for the end consumer. So.
I'm George Shaw. I run the R&D group at RetailNext. We gather up as much information as we can about what happens inside a store, give that information back to retailers in ways that help them run their business.
Great. So, basically the way we set this up was we have journalist, buyer, and then vendors. So it'll be a little grilling here. I wanted to start out just talking about the retail industry as a whole, because as a member of the media industry, the one thing we know is that there's always a lower bottom. And so when we talk about the retail industry, I think there's been a lot of concern and a lot of disruption that's happened over the last 10 years, particularly with the growth of e-commerce. But there's this sort of thread that says the introduction of mobile and the introduction of some of these other web-based tools to brick and mortar retail has sort of turned the corner. So the question I wanted to open up first with was, are we still in that period of quote unquote disruption, or has the retail industry turned a corner? Ben?
I think it's turning the corner. I do believe that it's got huge opportunity to be able to go up the same way e-commerce took people out of the stores in some way. Now that all of these mobile technologies are out there, the consumer is way more empowered. I believe that the tools are starting to come for people to kind of go out and having that kind of experience in store.
Yeah, I mean, I think some retailers have turned the corner and some have not. What it really comes down to is, when way back in the day, we were a kind of a commodity-driven economy, and then from there it was a goods-driven economy, and then a services economy. But what's happened now is we've moved into an experience economy. And like the difference between a taxi and an Uber is solely the experience, not any kind of actual thing to it. And for retailers, they really got killed with e-commerce because if it's just about goods and services, e-commerce can do it better. The opportunity right now is to bring good experiences to the retail store, which is something that's kind of harder to do online. And that's really the opportunity for retailers, I think.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think we're in the process of turning that corner. I think things are changing pretty quickly right now with e-commerce kind of coming into the store, and with mobile especially, where your shopping experience doesn't begin or end when you're on the website or when you're in the store. Everything's kind of together. That shopping experience takes place sort of continuously. It's always going on. And it's an opportunity, especially for an analytics company like RetailNext. We're just now learning how to kind of bring all of that information together, and give that back to a retailer in a way that they can say, well, this is what my consumers are doing at home. This is what they're doing on their mobile phones while they're in the store. This is the experience, to your point, that they're having while they're in the store. And how can I optimize across all those? How can I understand how people are actually shopping in a comprehensive way?
Yeah, so one of the things we've seen is a number of new retail brands emerge that are built solely around a lot of these technologies. and they've succeeded really well. And one of the things we were talking about before backstage was really the challenge for established retailers to then coordinate an e-commerce department that handles e-commerce, a store department that handles traditional retail, and maybe a marketing department that kind of fits over both. Ben, can you talk a little bit about that challenge when you're working with your clients and kind of where we are in their organizational transition to be able to have someone who's a designated buyer for technology like these guys are selling?
Yeah, it depends on the company and the organization as to how they approach that. I've seen a lot of times where the technology focuses within their IT and they have their operations part. The greatest thing is when they start to realize that you're not in the marketing space, you're not in the technology space, it's something in between, and it's usually that we see as being like some kind of a digital department in itself to be able to kind of bridge those two gaps.
I know you guys aren't on the sales side, but do you have a sense of where the bulk of your kind of spending is coming from? Is it coming from kind of operations budgets? Is it coming from shopper marketing budgets?
Well, for us at least, it was traditionally it was coming more from operations and more from loss prevention budgets and those kind of budgets. It's shifting quite a bit now, where we're seeing a lot more coming from marketing, and we're seeing a lot more cooperation between these groups. It's funny, in some cases, the first time these groups talk to each other, and some retailers are when we're in the room. We're bringing these different groups together, but in a lot of the more sophisticated retailers, they're already together, and that's got to happen. I mean, omnichannel is kind of this buzzword, but what omnichannel really means is all these different groups coming together and cooperating more.
Do you think omnichannel, because there's a bunch of, Accenture came out with a study, I think it was about 3 months ago, and basically the study showed all of the various omnichannel capabilities, and consumer demand was about like 2x what the actual market was supplying. Do you think that's a technology problem, or is it an organizational problem, or is it something else that we're not talking about?
I think it's both, to be honest with you. It's going to be from an omnichannel perspective. There's nothing I hate more, because I'm like, I like to web room, right? I like to go and I like to see and do my research, and then I become a buyer. I go into a mode and I go into that store because I want that instant satisfaction. I want to buy that thing, that piece of electronics I'm looking for. But what always brings you down is if the inventory is not matched up. So you got this back-end system that needs to be to kind of show to keep that experience that goes through. But there are also people that kind of do get siloed into their different into the organizational structure. So your online e-commerce team may not have, even though they may have the data that's integrated in the back end, the experience itself is not something. There are jarring things that take consumers out of the roles and kind of confuse them in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably mostly organizational within the retailer. Just the incentive structure is, I'm the online retailer. If I make a sale, that's good for online. Now, if I make a sale that they pick up in store, who gets credit for that? And it's just a matter of getting the incentives where it's not necessarily like at the very top. There has to be an understanding that it doesn't really matter who makes the sale. It's that the company we made a good experience for the user, and that's ultimately what's kind of going to have to shift, and has already been shifting at a lot of the major retailers.
Yeah, I think it really has to come down to a consumer-centric view of shopping. It's not about being siloed. It's about how somebody shops. And I don't go and just shop online. I don't go and just shop in a store, and I don't think anybody really does anymore. You shop across all these different channels. You're not thinking about these individual kind of silos, and so the organizations have to kind of respond to that.
Right. Yeah, I think one of the things that probably some of the issues around some of the technology, I think, has sent some of the retailers, maybe made them a bit more concerned. And this is when I really want to start talking about the technology, because I think the technology is what produces the data, and the data is what kind of software runs and creates the experiences. So one thing I want to talk about is, about 3 years ago, we saw a bunch of companies come out, you guys were included in it, who were taking Wi-Fi data and understanding behavior based off of our phones pinging Wi-Fi. And it was this sort of brilliant hack that was not necessarily intended, but it was a very, very smart way of doing it. There was then some backlash, and in I think it was last year, Apple then stopped sharing the address that you needed to be able to deal with that. George, can you talk a little bit about that transition? I think any young industry is going to have these transitions. Talk a little bit of what happened and kind of how you've seen things develop.
Sure, sure. I think calling it a brilliant hack is exactly the right thing. I mean, it really did come down to a hack, but I think at the end of the day, it comes down to communication with consumers and helping them understand sort of what's actually going on. And when you have video in a store, you're counting traffic at the door using video, or you've got loss prevention video and so on. There's this implicit communication. People know that that's been happening. You know, it's no mystery to anybody, so there's no real concern about that. We've been collecting video in stores since the 70s. So going forward with mobile devices, you know, I think again it comes back to communication, where we're really focused on experiences where the consumer opts in. So whether you connect to the guest Wi-Fi and you've gone in and you've connected to the Wi-Fi and you know you've read some terms and conditions or not, but you've signed them. At the end of the day, you know you've opted in. You've said, sure, I'm a part of this. Or if it's beacons and apps and that whole ecosystem, it's functionally kind of the same thing where you've opted in. You've said, sure, I'll go ahead and participate in this. You know the missteps that happened before, I think were really around communication.
Yeah, I mean, I think to build on that, really, the reason it was done was because it was kind of the best way to do it, and then Apple kind of turned it off. But with that, they also brought in beacons. So iBeacons became kind of part of iOS 7 when that came out. And so really, when they closed one door, they opened a better door, we think at least, to really allow to tie mobile to the actual what's going on in the store. The trouble or the kind of potential pitfalls of beacons is that you sometimes don't get scale because you need apps that are listening for them. So before it was just at an operating system level, you could just ping everybody and get to know them. When you move to beacons, now you have to have an app that's listening for it. And that's kind of, a lot of the retailers who've kind of gone into this are like, oh, beacons are great, we're gonna start doing beacons. What they've come across is, hey, we put some beacons in the store, but there's no apps listening for them. I mean, on average, the top 10 retailers, they have about 5 million monthly active users on their apps. So, I mean, look at Walmart. They have 150 million people walking in their stores every week. You know, 5 million is nothing. It's a science project. So, really, it's about finding a way to kind of tackle that problem, and that's something that we've really been focusing on in terms of building an app footprint that can listen for more and more, or more apps that can listen for beacons to really get that scale up, so someone like Walmart can actually reach people at scale.
So George, how do you think about the relationship between, I mean, I was talking to someone the other day and they were saying that, you know, beacons are a messaging device, they're not a data collection and analytics device. How do you think about that relationship between, I guess, the two primary ways of interacting in store or understanding in store are video, analytics, and beacons? How do you think about those, the way that, you know, those two technologies kind of interact with your business?
We actually think that they're very complementary. You know, if I take sort of the nerd stance on that for a second, you know, that's sensor fusion. That's bringing together these two very complementary, very valuable data streams and helping them to interact so that you can learn more than you could from either one of those streams independently. And you know, just at a very high level, video sees everybody, and it's very, very precise. You know exactly where somebody is, where the data that you get from an app relative to beacons is less precise. You don't know exactly where somebody is, but you know a bit more about them because they've opted in, you can uniquely identify them and so on. So when you bring both of those together, it becomes a lot more powerful, greater than the sum of its parts.
Ben, when you're talking to your brands, I'm sure there's a bunch of brand marketers who are like, oh, I want beacons. You know, it's something shiny. In your experience of having to execute on their demands and it probably being difficult, what do you think is the kind of critical flaw with beacons today that's kind of limiting their growth?
It's not a flaw with beacons, it's just where we are in the cycle. It's like it's a base technology. So when someone says, I want to do beacons because I heard this great story at a conference about now I can do all of this stuff with whatever their beacon story was. The thing is that the second you say you need to make an app, and the challenge isn't making the app, you can make that experience, it's just getting your consumer to actually install and keep it installed and having that value proposition. Because if it's just for a campaign, like no one's going to do it. And so it comes into, it needs to be a part of a platform. And that's what kind of we're waiting for sometimes, is saying, like, especially a brand in a retail environment, it doesn't matter about the beacons, it matters about the platform that's built on top of that beacons. How can we get our messages across? If it comes to that we're managing a retail environment, it's kind of like, how do you set up that platform to be able to do it and give the value proposition to the customer?
Yeah, I mean, and for a brand, the last thing you want to do is have to create the whole thing. Like, that's not what brands do. I mean, if you look at television, you know, they don't create the network, the piping, and they don't then create like television programming just to show their ads in it. You know what I mean? The piping already exists. There's television networks already out there. And then the brand comes in and does what they do, which is advertise and help pay for everything. So that kind of infrastructure is what's needed in the beacon space. And that's kind of what we're trying to do. But the other thing that I think is really important about what you're talking about is that the technology is just technology. You can use it for good and you can use it kind of poorly. It's kind of it's an enabler, but you can also do, I mean, we released a study, it was on TechCrunch a few months ago, where we did a bunch of tests and with beacons about different kinds of messaging. So we found that with one message, and if it was well sent and it was well timed and good contextually relevant, you could increase kind of interaction in the store with a product by like 1,600%, like a huge number. But then if you kept messaging that user, suddenly they were dropping by over 300%, and their usage was dropping and they're deleting apps. So is that the beacon's fault, one way or the other? No, it's about, I want to create a good experience, and how can I do that? What technology enables that? So.
Yeah, and to add on to that, something that we see is, and it's our point of view, is always about the consumer and the modes that the consumer's in. And at TPN, we view it as being like the buyer, shopper, consumer, and influencer. Those are the four modes that somebody kind of goes through as they're going through their shopper journey. And for us, it's kind of like, don't do technology for technology's sake. And it's always under the guise of test to learn. And what ends up happening is that it becomes something as, I'm going to throw beacons out there, see what they do. And then it's like, but you didn't have a goal. You didn't have something that you were trying to build upon. And then the technology itself is what's sold short.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the right approach. You know, you as a retailer, you go and you ask the questions. These are the things that I think are gonna change my business, and then you try to figure out what technology is gonna drive that. And some of that may be beacons. You know, beacons are a really powerful tool, especially as they get, you know, more and more adoption and the apps. You know, when people have more apps that can see beacons, it becomes really powerful. But then driving the right engagement and driving the right sort of interaction with those apps, I think, is really crucial.
Is there like a killer application for beacons yet? I mean, I think a lot of platforms, a lot of devices, a lot of technologies need some sort of killer application to be able to express to consumers why this is so amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when it comes to app usage, like, I mean, you know, there's Facebook, I guess, that everybody uses, but for the most part, it's pretty fragmented. Everybody, I mean, it's very much a kind of a niche marketplace. There's millions of apps, and they're all doing different things. And I think that that's really the best approach, as opposed to, hey, you all need to do this. It's better to kind of, here's the technology, what experience is best for this app? So like, we work with Epicurious, and they have something about okay, I favorited a particular recipe, so when I walk into a store, it reminds me, hey, here are the ingredients for that recipe if you wanted to make it. Or if you're a shopping list app, it'll let you know, don't forget to buy milk. Your wife just added it to the list. You're at the store, you know, grab it. And that's useful, that's relevant. Or, but there's all kinds of shoppers. There's people who like those really kind of list-oriented things, and there's people who are more driven by price, and they have coupons apps. So it's kind of like, here's the deal for something like that.
So is the innovation going to come not from the retailers, but from the like application and media companies that are building these content
I mean,
experience?
that's kind of the precedent, right? So if you look at other channels, if like television, for example, we were talking about, the innovation comes from the content creators. How can I create great content that people are interested in, that they find relevant, they tune in for? And then advertising kind of sits on top of that. Now, retailers kind of sit in a double world where they enable it as the kind of the housing, right? They enable the technology by putting the beacon in their store, but they also have apps. And some of them have really great apps, like the Walgreens app is an exceptional app that people love using, and Cartwheel's a great app. So they're kind of, you know, they're huge companies, and there's different aspects to them, and so they can create great content as well. But if the idea is that I'm a consumer at Target, so when I walk into Target, it's 100% of our people must have our app. That's a ridiculous notion. You're never going to get that scale going through just the one app. That's why you need to open it up for multiple apps to be able to get there.
So George, Ben had a good phrase there. He was talking about data porn and just the data for data's sake and just watching it and whatever. And one thing I was trying to figure out is what are like the block and tackling of in-store analytics? Like what are the data points that people know how to use and they're really beneficial for retailers, and they're things that every retailer should use?
Well, I mean, the low-hanging fruit is obviously traffic counting at the door. Every retailer has it. Something like 90% of top-tier retailers are counting traffic at the door. So that's table stakes. But then to get beyond that, people are trying to understand more and more what's happening inside the store. And I think as we get into this more complex ecosystem, where consumers are shopping in different ways, you've got to understand what happens inside the store. Understand these shopping modes that Ben talks about, and understand what people are doing while they're in there. So I think that's crucial. And then as far as how to do that, there are lots of different ways to do it. It's going to vary a lot whether you're a 2,000 square foot specialty luxury goods retailer as opposed to a 30,000 square foot big box. So we start with those questions. What are people doing? What are their behaviors? Where do they spend their time? When they went here, where did they go next? And then figure out how to gather that information.
What about that data as a means of offline attribution? I mean, that's been the big thing holding back a lot of mobile media, is that a lot of the mobile media drives in-store purchases, and measuring that is a really tough thing. Is that like a reasonable baseline? Is that a helpful baseline to be able to actually measure performance and solve that problem?
I think it's an unbelievably useful data point. I think we collectively as an industry haven't quite figured out how to get it yet. I think it's a big challenge. I think the technical parts of that challenge are pretty straightforward. The technology's there. It's not difficult. And beacons and apps solves that. Connecting to Wi-Fi solves that. Tying all that back to video and some of these other technologies all solve that pretty readily. It's a question of adoption and it's a question of scale.
Great. So I think the big thing, right? We always talk about the importance of measuring in store, but the sort of vision for all this is a single DB that holds all of the kind of data for all consumer journey, right? That it doesn't matter if you're interacting on your mobile device, doesn't matter if you're interacting on your search on desktop or you're in store. Being able to create that. And Ben, we had talked about this challenge of context, and this challenge you said you often will go into a store and know exactly what I want, and other times you'll go into the store and have no idea what you want.
And it's not just that, you switch, right? So we were talking last night, I went into an electronics store because I wanted this one screen, and they didn't have it. They didn't have what I wanted, and so I was kind of upset, but I wasn't going to get talked out of it because I was in a buyer mode. But right away, I looked at the televisions on the other side of the room, and I went straight into a shopper mode where I was like, I want to talk to you about those things over there, and I want to see, and I want to learn more about it, and then I'm open to influence. It wasn't before, and then I was now. And if you're going to be connecting people like through digital offers or things that are using beacons or whatnot, understanding the context and how to get that content across is super, super important. And I think that would be the killer app in a way, to be able to know this person here is shopping. Like I can kind of engage with them specifically on this level, as opposed to like more of a static campaign where you have one single tactic and you're missing half of your audience.
I love to hear you say that, because that's exactly what we're trying to do. Is to be able to understand those modes and those behaviors, and you switching modes like that. In theory, if you think about it, you could do that automatically. That's still a technological challenge. But if I was sitting there watching you, I'd know that you switched modes. So eventually a computer will be able to do that, right? And that's exactly what we're trying to get after.
So is that a technological problem or a kind of data management, data privacy problem?
It's a technological problem. I think it's a data science problem is really what it is. Collecting that data, the technical pieces of it are, I wouldn't say they're solved completely, but they're pretty close to being solved. That's seeing people's movement, across a large area in a store. That stuff is we do that. It's relatively solved. But understanding that and understanding those modes, that's data science. And there's a lot of progress being made. I don't think it's quite there yet.
Yeah, I mean, two things. So the first is you need scale, right? Because again, as we talk about 5 million, so we have a series of apps, and they're reaching 40 million people, 40 million monthly active users, according to ComScore. So that's on the way to there. It's still not 100% of people. It's about 25% of people, which is pretty good, but it's still not all the way there. The second thing is I think it's better not to think of this as a technology problem. I think it's best to always start with an experience. What's the experience I want to create? So if you collect all this data, well, what are you going to do with it? And you can kind of think like, well, maybe down the road we'll kind of figure out what to do with the data after we collected it. But I mean, for us, for users to come on board and to feel comfortable with this, really it has to start with, here's the benefit. Here is why when I walk into this store that has beacons, it feels this way, versus I walk into this other store and they don't have any information, it feels better. Because that kind of divide, that problem is what needs to be solved. And then the technology and the adoption, all of that will kind of follow suit. I mean, that's our approach.
Because the action, the consumer's in control. So if you don't give that value prop, it's like you're gone. Like they will reject your app like fast and fast. So like if you're
Push
not
the
able
delete
to do
button,
it,
it's gone.
yeah, exactly. So it's not. Privacy is an interesting way of kind of talking about the data, but for me, it's more about what risk as a retailer or brand are you willing to take with those kinds of things. So, and risk not being a bad thing. The way that when we talk about it, our brands usually will just be risk adverse, so they just don't want them bad press to come from it. So why would I take that risk?
Fair enough. So, a lot of times we talk about all these opportunities, and there's millions of different, combinations of technologies and combinations of ideas. But I think, Ben, I wanted to end here by asking you, what's your sort of agency wish list? The technology, the capability that you wish you could have that you don't right now in terms of in-store marketing?
Well, for people to have their connected experience. We're a very consumer-focused agency, so we always take it as being, it's not technology for technology's sake. It's not about the campaign as much as it's about the shopper journey and what they're going on and how we're kind of catering that campaign and the technology to be able to do it. My big thing is about context and to be able to hit those people at the right moments within the right times.
Are you confident that that's coming in the next year or two, or is that something that's going to take a little more time?
So to the point of the technology being like, if I sold refrigerators, I'm not going to run electricity to everyone's house to be able to sell them that refrigerator. So it's kind of like once the technology base and platforms start to get there, that's when we'll start to see a lot of the magic start to happen.
Great. Well, I just want to thank these guys. Are there any other questions? We got about a minute. Yep.
Talk about you all have the device of SMS texting and chatting. So where's the evolution there? Is it passed it up, or is it coming back to it? For an in-store experience, let's say, right? We have short code, you have long code that's starting to come into play. What's wrong with that platform?
Oh, there's nothing wrong with that platform. We use that all the time to be able to run campaigns and to be able to get, just like, usually what ends up happening is these are like bleeding edge, cutting edge technologies, and they like to talk about them to be able to say like, this is a new thing, so can we do something different? Can we be creative about how we implement something? But usually what ends up happening is that you start falling back and you get into QR codes, and you get into bit.lys, and you get into figuring out like, can I get my message across that way? But for what we're talking about here, it's about trying to push the next evolution, because you can actually be way more relevant when it starts coming that you've got that one-to-one connection. And I think people are scared of it a little bit, but it's something that could be like super powerful if done right.
Great. Well, I want to give these guys a round of applause. I think that was a great panel. All right.